Places Secretary of State for Wales, Chris Bryant.
Number 1, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are 205,000 self-employed people in Wales, 110,000 of whom are receiving direct cash grants totalling over £295 million through the government's Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. The scheme is one of a range of government initiatives supporting the self-employed during the coronavirus outbreak.
Chris Bryant.
Mr Speaker, if you might indulge me for a moment just to pass on my commiserations to everybody who's been involved in the horrific car crash accident in Trebanog in the Rhondda earlier today, and many thanks to the police and the fire brigade who have been helping. The Secretary of State is right that there are lots of people who have received help, but there's an awful lot of people in the Rhondda who haven't had a single penny. People who set up a company just 2 years ago, they've now lost their business and their home and their livelihood. There are people who've gone from having £3,000 a month in the bank to going down to £300 a month in the bank. I really say to him, when we come to the next round of decisions by the government and the Treasury, we have to do something for the 3 million people who've been excluded from every single scheme, because otherwise they just feel this has been massively unfair. And we have hundreds of tradespeople in the Rhondda who haven't had a single penny off the government.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I know the whole House will join me in expressing their own sympathy for the accident in his constituency this morning. I know what a blow it is for him and everybody involved, so our thoughts are with all of those concerned. In relation to the schemes, I suspect as constituency MPs we all have examples of people who've fallen through the net as far as this is concerned. I can only reiterate what the Chancellor has said on numerous occasions, that we will always try and look at every possible eventuality so that the smallest possible number of people who qualify for help and aren't for some reason getting it, get it. So if he wishes to raise any individual cases, and we've all had them, I'm more than happy to do so.
We now come to Shadow Secretary of State Neil Griffith with first of 2 questions.
Mr Speaker, my thoughts too are with those caught up in the awful crash in the Rhondda. Now, Mr Speaker, many self-employed people in Wales who've already been hard hit by lockdown now fear the impact on their customer base of the looming spectre of mass unemployment hanging over their communities, industrial communities that still bear the scars of the damage wreaked by the Tories in the 80s. So when will his government grasp the urgency of the situation and bring forward specific measures for those industries like aviation which need longer to recover in order to support the thousands of Welsh workers who depend on these sectors?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the Honourable Lady sort of makes an unnecessary political point in that, because the government, along with Welsh Government, I should add, has done everything it can to make sure the smallest possible number of people in Wales have gone without, obviously, important assistance during this pandemic. What is important to remember is that furlough is not, if she's hinting that the extension of furlough is the only answer, it isn't. The Treasury have said that is one option, but there are numerous other options which ought to help people, and already helping people make their way out of COVID and back into a sort of properly functioning economy. And of course, the best way to do this, the best way to save jobs across the whole of Wales, is to get people safely back to work.
Well, indeed, Mr Speaker, but there is now barely a month to go before his government's got job protection schemes end, leaving thousands of self-employed people and others at risk of unemployment. And it's not just Labour saying that. Businesses, trade unions and the Treasury Select Committee have all sounded the alarm. So will the government accept that a one-size-fits-all approach to this jobs crisis is simply not working? And will they now come forward with some concrete proposals and a real plan to safeguard jobs for people right across Wales?
State.
Mr Speaker, a third of the workforce of Wales has been supported by UK government during the pandemic. It's gone further and deeper than any other government pretty well in the world. VAT deferrals, mortgage holidays, rental support, increases to universal credit, relaxation of minimum income, VAT reductions. This is not a one-size-fits-all arrangement. This is a whole package of measures which are designed to help as many people as possible stay in work and get back to work when just as soon as it's safe to do so. And I'm surprised she's not welcoming that.
Jessica Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the issue of the 3 million excluded, my honourable friend the Rhondda was absolutely right in his question. And at a time when more local areas are facing lockdowns, can I also urge ministers to do far more to help those who've fallen through the gaps, at the very least to address the issue of the 5-week wait for universal credit? It should be a grant and not an advance.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady that there will never be a moment when the government or the Wales Office sits back and think that we've done enough as far as this is concerned. We are always striving. We will always strive to make sure that we improve every one of the schemes we've got, and where there are gaps which we've identified before, and colleagues on this side of the House have also been helpful in that respect, we will do everything we can to make sure they are plugged.
Jonathan Edwards.
Number 2, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 together. The Government's response to the UK internal market consultation published last week highlighted the broad support for the proposals from businesses and job creators in Wales. The bill gives businesses the continued certainty of seamless trade across the UK as the transition period ends.
Jonathan Edwards.
Okay, Mr Speaker. Much of the rhetoric around the internal market bill is that it's a shared asset, yet what's missing is any shared intergovernmental structures. On Owain Glyndŵr Day, why won't the British government be honest for once and admit that they're using consequential legislation resulting from Brexit, such as the internal market bill, to effectively reassert direct Westminster rule over Wales?
Well, Mr Speaker, I disagree with the fundamental premise of the honourable gentleman's question. The reason I do that is this went to public consultation, and the public response to these proposals, and I will quote one business in Wales, promoting Wales, employing people in Wales, contributing to the Welsh economy, says the UK bill will be the making of the UK. And it seems to me that the comments relating to UKIM are divided into politicians who are anxious to protect their sort of cosy clique in Cardiff, and business and employers and public in Wales who recognise that this is an important part of the next stage of our economic recovery.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The proposals in this bill are designed to make sure that the ease with which UK businesses can trade across our 4 home nations continues to be enjoyed in a way that helps them invest and create jobs, just as it has done for hundreds of years. Therefore, it is extremely important that businesses are on board and happy with the proposals that we have put forward. Can the Secretary of State tell us what conversations he's had with businesses across Wales about these proposals and outline what sort of response he has received?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend raises an interesting point. We've had numerous engagements in person with the Business Secretary and others, also in online engagements, and I can safely assure the House that those who have responded have not expressed in any way any great concerns about UKIM. In fact, they see it as a perfectly natural successor to the existing status quo. They want us to proceed with it, they consider it to be fair, and most importantly, they consider that jobs depend on it.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Ministers seem to be in a state of denial as to what this internal market bill actually says. It is quite clear that it will give the power to the UK government to make spending decisions in Wales on matters which are devolved to the Welsh Parliament. So can he tell the House how on earth that respects the devolution settlement?
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman, it illustrates my point that it seems that certainly in certain nationalist quarters this is all about politics and all about power, whereas in fact it's all about jobs and it's all about the economy and it's all about people grafting to find their way out of a post-COVID situation. I can tell him that there isn't a single power, not one, which Welsh Government will not have after this bill is completed. In fact, it will have 70 new ones. The fact that UK Government is going to be there as well to contribute to the economy of Wales in a way it hasn't been able to do for 45 years should be welcomed by he and his colleagues in Wales as a major step forward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Next spring at Milton Keynes Theatre will host the Welsh National Opera, a great historic institution in Milton Keynes, hosting a great Welsh institution. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's not just the free movement of goods, but also the free movement of people, of culture, of ideas and of values between our 4 nations that makes our union so strong?
Mr Speaker, that is a wholly appropriate question, because what it enables me to say is, of course, that sometimes when we talk about the strength of the union, we limit ourselves to simply talking about economic activity. But my honourable friend is right to point out that the union is magical for a whole lot of other reasons too, and the cultural, social elements that he describes absolutely sum up why the union is important, and actually why some of the legislation and some of the ideas we're talking about enhance that, they encourage that, and they will finance that over the coming years.
Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the public consultation around the Internal Market Bill, and can I reinforce the reality in Mid Wales and Montgomeryshire, economic activity, transport links, and indeed our public services look to the West Midlands economy, and my constituents and businesses have been looking at the progress of this bill. They welcome it, they want it, and they don't want the distraction of Cardiff Bay politicians or nationalist politicians distracting from the fact that they would welcome investment, and I look forward to lobbying the Secretary of State and the Department for Transport to build things like the Middletown bypass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I'm a former resident of my honourable friend's constituency, and I know exactly what he is referring to. And it's worth reminding ourselves that actually a quarter of the workforce of his own constituency actually cross the border every day to make a living and cross back again in the evening. It has to be a porous border. The worst thing for jobs and economic recovery in Mid Wales, or indeed anywhere else, are artificial political boundaries put up for the advantages of a few people, as I say, in a cosy arrangement in Cardiff. We're talking about proper jobs, proper people, proper parts of Wales which require and should deserve the support of all of the parties, including the nationalists who make so much noise about this but never actually deliver.
First of two questions, Liv Saville-Roberts.
On the 8th of July, the Secretary of State, in response to a question from my friend, the Honourable Member for Ceredigion, said that ending our relationship with Europe would allow public bodies in Wales to buy more local goods, more local products and more local services. Yet his own government's UK Internal Market Bill appears to block local measures that would prioritise local goods or services over those from other parts of the UK. How does he reconcile these two positions now?
Reconcile the position, Mr. Speaker, by not recognising the claim that is being made. The UK Internal Market Bill, if the public consultation is ended to go by, forget what us politicians may say, welcomes the idea because it secures as a market that has been enjoyed for hundreds of years. People see it as logical, they see it as a perfectly reasonable step forward to enshrine in UK law what has hitherto, or for 45 years, been conducted in Brussels. They see that as good for jobs, and the Honourable Lady seems to have some objection to that.
Mr. Roberts.
Well, he said it, and it was in the white paper. Procurement was mentioned there, and I think that, given that that's one of the weapons in the armoury of the Welsh Government in which to support businesses, that it would be fair to expect something on that here. But I will move on. Today marks, of course, the anniversary of the proclamation of Owen Glyndŵr as Prince of Wales at the first Senedd, or Parliament, in Machynlleth.
There wasn't one.
There was a Senedd in Machynlleth. 2020 saw the renaming of the Assembly as Senedd, or Welsh Parliament.
There wasn't.
Maybe the significance is lost in a certain Welsh MP. Maybe the significance is lost in translation.
Order. We're not having the debate on the benches. Please have the discussion outside afterwards and let me know the result of that discussion. Let's have a look.
Maybe even the debate is lost entirely here or lost in translation, Mr. Speaker. But how can he reconcile this historical serendipity with his government's brazen power grab?
Mr. Speaker, it seems astounding to me that on the one hand the Labour opposition consider the UKIP to be a threat to the Union, and the Nationalists consider it to be a threat to separatism. I think they should continue their debate so that they can inform the rest of the House to what their objection is. But the idea that a piece of legislation which results in 70 new powers and none being removed as a power grab is a definition of power grab that I don't recognise.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the party opposite promised to strengthen the Union and strengthen the devolved settlements. But their internal market bill does exactly the opposite, as the Secretary of State's colleague, David Melding, knows. So will he accept that rather than being about promising more powers to Wales, promises we simply cannot believe, the government's internal markets bill actually rolls back the powers, undermines the devolution settlement and gives comfort to those who want to break up the Union?
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is no, no and no. The reason being that when it comes to testing the temperature and mood of the people of Wales, I rely on public consultations and my engagement with businesses, employers, north, south, east, west and mid, and none of them make the claims that the honourable gentleman has. They see this as a perfectly natural transition from EU rule to UK and Welsh Government collaborative operations from Wales. That seems to them to be perfectly sensible. It seems to me to be perfectly sensible. And again, it seems that the objection to this is one about politics and power rather than about jobs and livelihoods.
More. We all know the only person the Secretary of State listens to is the number 10 chief advisor, like every other member of the governing party. The reality is, Mr Speaker, that Brexit Minister in the Welsh Government, Jerry Miles, has been very clear. There are no new devolution powers. They are within the existing rules of devolution. Members can pontificate all they like. The reality is, Mr Speaker, they're trying to roll back devolution because they don't like what the people of Wales do when it comes to Welsh Government elections by electing Labour-led governments. This is a reversal of 20 years of the Tories not liking who is elected to government in Wales.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman needs to remind himself that there wasn't a single seat in Wales where Labour didn't lose votes at the last election. He needs to be a little careful. He needs to, with respect, be a little careful about making accusations based on the sort of the political reality. The economic reality is that people of Wales do not share his enthusiasm for defining this next stage of our sort of post-COVID and post-Brexit evolution purely on sort of political one-upmanship. They want to see jobs and investment. That's what we intend to deliver.
Kevin Brennan.
Number 14, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State and myself have had regular discussions with Welsh ministers, including the First Minister, on a wide range of matters, including preparations for the end of the transition period. Preparations for the end of the year are well advanced and build on the plans we had in place for a no-deal scenario in 2019.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. When he has those discussions with the First Minister, has he discussed how the so-called shared prosperity fund will be spent in Wales? Yeah. Because far from the, I don't know if you've seen any opinion polls recently, but far from people in Wales regarding the Welsh Government as a cosy clique in Cardiff, as the Secretary of State puts it, they far prefer them to a swivel-eyed bunch of incompetents in Westminster to run their affairs. And so, therefore, could he commit to the House now that every penny of that money will be allowed to be spent by the democratically elected government in Cardiff?
Well, Mr Speaker, there are no swivel-eyed eyes on this side of the House, and if the honourable gentleman ought to restrain himself a little. I don't think anyone would want to be looking at his eyes at the moment. The reality is, Mr Speaker, that far more people have voted for members of Parliament in Wales than members of the Welsh Assembly. The turnout is always higher, which rather rebuts his point. But obviously, the Shared Prosperity Fund, which we've already said will match the amount of money that came from the European Union, will of course be spent in Wales after discussions with ministers in both the Senedd and in Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister will be aware of the news overnight that Hitachi have decided to pull out of the project to build the Wolfenawedd nuclear power station on Anglesey, a project which is of strategic importance to the Welsh economy, but also helps the UK meet its net zero target by 2050. So can I ask my honourable friend if he would leave no stone unturned in his quest to see whether there's a way forward for this project, and in particular if he would continue his discussions with ministerial colleagues here and in Cardiff Bay, and also continue working with the honourable member for Ynys Môn, who's worked so hard to get this project moving.
Mr Speaker, I'm very happy to confirm that already my right honourable friend has had discussions with Horizon about this. The announcement was deeply disappointing for all of us and came on the back of concerns which Hitachi had, so I'm told, about the situation with COVID and the Japanese economy. Nonetheless, Wilbur is one of the best sites in the world in which to build a nuclear power station, and I understand that already Horizon have been sounding out the possibility of this project going ahead with other developers.
16 withdrawn, so can you do a substantive question, Minister, from Geraint Davies? Come on, do the question and then I'll come back. Minister, you have to do the lead-in.
Well, Mr Speaker, high street banks have been at the forefront of lending to firms impacted by COVID-19. They provided support to Welsh firms through over £1.1 billion worth of loans under the government's Bounce Back Loan Scheme, £300 million of loans under the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, and there has also been an additional £100 million of lending through the Development Bank of Wales, which has been a very useful contribution.
Let's head over to New York with Geraint Davies.
Thank you very much. Over here in Wales, the Development Bank of Wales has been found by the Welsh Affairs Select Committee to be much more effective in delivering coronavirus loans to business than high street banks, which have found to be unresponsive, delayed, risk-averse, not understanding local businesses. So will the Secretary of State and Minister impress upon the Chancellor the need to provide more funding for the Development Bank of Wales and to import this excellent idea into England to help all British business?
Minister Davies.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suppose it wouldn't come as a great surprise to the honourable gentleman or anyone who understands economics as he does that a high street bank is always going to be slightly more risk-averse than a bank which is backed by the UK Treasury. But nonetheless, I would just draw his attention to the figures I gave earlier, which show that about £1.4 billion has been lent out to businesses in Wales via high street banks on the utilising government schemes. £100 million has come via the Development Bank for Wales. This isn't some sort of a competition. We welcome every single pound that has been lent out to Welsh businesses, no matter where it's come from.
More.
Number 18, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, obviously my honourable friend will be aware that testing for COVID in Wales is a matter for the Welsh Government, and we respect the devolved responsibilities that they have. I also understand that testing in Wales, which would be a responsibility of the Welsh Government have decided to seek support from the UK Government, and so the Department for Health and Social Care have been working directly with them to offer any help they need to deliver an efficient testing and analysis programme.
Robbie Moore.
Thank my right honourable friend for a response. We've made huge progress in rapidly scaling up our testing capacity, and I've witnessed this for myself in my constituency of Keighley, but there is always more that we can do. So what steps is my right honourable friend taking to explore with the Welsh Government the benefits of repeat population testing? And if it proves effective, how can this be scaled up across Wales and the rest of the UK?
Yeah. Well, as my right honourable friend will be aware, we've made enormous strides in increasing the amount of daily testing that is available, but it is not yet enough in either Wales or England or elsewhere in the United Kingdom to meet the huge rise in demand that we've seen over the last few weeks. So the UK Government have set a target of 500,000 a day testing capacity for the end of October, and we're also increasing the number of testing sites to 500 by the end of October. So across Wales and the United Kingdom, we are working very hard. Governments of all sorts of different political persuasions are working hard and working together to increase testing and to meet the demand that is there.
Fair Jones.
Thank you. Number 19, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the end of July, more than 400,000 Welsh jobs have been supported by the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, while £295 million has been provided to support 110,000 self-employed people. Since the start of March, that's at least 510,000 people in Wales who've been supported directly by the UK government.
Fair Jones.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. More than 77,000 meals were enjoyed in Brecon and Radnorshire as part of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme created by the UK Treasury. This provided a very welcome boost to the hospitality and tourism sectors in my constituency, which I particularly welcome as those are sectors that largely employ more women than men. Would my right honourable friend join me in encouraging the Welsh Government to do their part, create a similar scheme and get more women back into the workplace?
My honourable friend makes a really good point, and having visited her constituency, I think, twice in the recent past, I know just how much she's done to promote these schemes. There is another value, Mr. Speaker, to the Eat Out Help Out scheme, which perhaps we can use this opportunity to, and that is reminding everybody, whether members of the public or members of this House, for that matter, of the importance of supporting local businesses in every possible way that we can as we climb out of this horrible few months. And the work that my honourable friend has done and that of the Treasury, I think, has been a pretty good start.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A key element in supporting people back into work is access to high-speed broadband, particularly in rural areas. Would my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the first broadband USO connection in Wales, which was launched last week in Tregeiriog in the Ceiriog Valley in my constituency of Clwyd South? as part of the government's, across the UK, their universal service obligation scheme to improve broadband, where it is currently running at a low level.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid is a solid champion of this particular cause. There are 3,500 premises in Clwyd South and over 200,000 in Wales that have access to full fibre connection. But as he says himself, this is only the start. So those businesses, those individuals who operate and really need high-quality broadband, the clock is ticking in their favour, and this will help jobs and families and prosperity in Wales.
Lucy Powell.
Question number 21, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government shares the steel industry's ambitions for a sustainable future in Wales, and that is why the Business Secretary, Chancellor and I worked to reach an agreement with CELSA, which saved hundreds of jobs in Wales. I have frequent discussions with Cabinet colleagues about supporting Welsh steel industry, especially in dealing with the impact of COVID-19.
Lucy Powell.
I thank the Secretary of State for that answer. In the debate held in this House the other evening, led by my honourable friend, the member for Newport East, we heard about how the Welsh steel sector has been so adversely affected by this economic crisis. The response from the Minister was yet again, I'm afraid, lots of warm words. When are we going to see more action, notwithstanding CELSA, but more action to support this vital industry in Wales to save jobs and the economy?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to think that warm words are better than cold words, and I think that the action speaks louder than words, whatever temperature they may come at. And the fact is that UK government absolutely recognise the importance of the sector. That's why we did the deal with CELSA. That's why we saved 800 jobs there, and that sends a message to other steel producers in Wales that we do mean business. We're not just talking about the survival of the industry during COVID. We're talking about having a significant steel manufacturing presence in Wales in 5 years, 10 years and 15 years, and that is why we continue these discussions. And the CELSA deal ought to be a source of encouragement for everyone that actually, when it comes to it, we do mean business.